Good evening. Tonight we're going to be listening to Scott Jable. Scott is one of my oldest friends, and being as old as I am, I have a lot of old friends. I didn't say he's the most aged friend, but I've known Scott since our college days back in 1983, I think it was, which is a long time ago, Scott. Right? Long time. And Scott has been involved, and he's been working with recycling. And we went to a Cubs game, and I'm sitting in the back seat of a car. It was very small, and the people there were doing recycle talk. And he started talking about recycling, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is it killed an hour and a half of time like this because we just kept asking questions. And I thought this would be a great thing to talk about. My entrance into the recycling world actually was come about by some of my students. I had a couple of proactive students who I used to make fun of recycling. And this was way back before anybody recycled. And they came up to me and they said, you know, Paul, you teach a lot about the environment and things around that. And we think you should be doing recycling. And, you know, I really respect my students who have the courage to come up and say something to me. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to start doing it. And I started collecting newspapers. That was what we did. And back in the day, we had to take the newspapers to a recycling place in town. So we'd have these big stacks of newspaper. You know how many people know what a newspaper is? Scott was saying, when's the last time you physically held a newspaper? Oh,
look at that.
So again, old
Extra
friends.
credit right there.
Right? So I used to bring it in to Glen Ellen and do that. And then all of a sudden they had those big blue recycling bins. And I've been recycling kind of ever since. And most of you know, you probably have some thoughts about what's real about recycling. Is this really worth it? And after talking to Scott and giving all my cynicism, he's like, no, there's some cool stuff. Let me tell you about it. So Scott Jable is going to tell you about that. So Scott, welcome.
Thank you. All right, so we all need to get in the back of my car and go to a Cubs game right now, and I'll start telling you all about this. First of all, I'm going to ask for a little forgiveness. I am battling a cold, which is why I didn't shake anybody's hand. If I suddenly go into a coughing fit, I apologize to the AV team. I'll do my best. As Paul said, I'm Scott Jable. I've known Paul for years, and I've been in the recycling industry for 30 years now. It is a close-knit group of people. Very few set out to go into the recycling industry unless it's family heritage, but it is an industry that if you get into it, you pretty much stay in for life because it is a fascinating industry and it's one that's important for the environment, for the economy, for all of us here in this room. So as Paul said, I get asked a lot of questions and there's a lot of lack of information. There's also a lot of misinformation out there. Two of the questions I get asked the most, one I'm going to answer immediately in this presentation, the other I'm going to answer at the very end. The first one is, come on, is this real? I mean, every year you read some story about a garbage truck that gets stopped on its way to the landfill that's filled with recyclables. Well, that's really what's going on. Nobody's actually doing any of this. You missed the best part of my presentation, by the way. I killed it right at the beginning. So I'm going to answer that right away by showing you a video. And then at the very end, the other question I get is, okay, what do I do as someone from Glen Ellen or like myself? I grew up in Downers Grove. I'm now living in Naperville. You know, what do I do to actually do this right and help out the recycling effort in our country? So I want to start by showing you a video that is hopefully going to put aside any questions you have as to whether or not recycling really happens. Over the course of 30 years in this industry, I've worked for a Dutch company and three German companies. So I've seen recycling in almost every state in the United States and in about 11 other countries. And I have a pretty good handle on what's going on here and especially in Europe. But what I wanted to show you was the latest and greatest here in the United States. And this is kind of a promotional video, but I'm using it because it literally is a facility that just opened in July It's out of Columbus, Ohio, a group called Rumpke, who basically owns the city of Ohio when it comes to recycling. And they just spent $100 million on this facility. So if you have any question if it's real or not, very few people spend $100 million for window dressing.
You're in the Rumpke Recycling and Resource Center, our newest material recovery facility right here in Columbus, Ohio. This is a 226,000 square foot recycling facility built right in the center of the growing Columbus and Central Ohio region. Rumpke is a leader in recycling and waste service, and we had a great opportunity in Columbus to build the most technologically advanced recycling facility in North America.
We're going to discuss some of the tech you see
We
in detail.
started working
in
with
just a little
Rumpke
bit.
approximately 2.5 to 3 years ago on concepts and designs for a larger facility. So when we started the process, we talked about what do we want the MRF to do now? What do we want the MRF to do tomorrow?
MRF
And what do
is
we want
Material
the MRF to be able to
Recovery
do,
Facility.
10 years down the road. And as that material stream is going to consistently change, those were the considerations that we took into consideration. So the tip floor itself was built very large to be able to handle the inbound tonnage. We're currently processing, it was scheduled to be 56 tons per hour of residential recycling, plus 20 tons per hour of commercial. And we've achieved those results, it actually exceeded those results to where we're processing north of 60 tons per hour all the time. And when we run straight residential, even more than that.
One of the mission statement that Rumpke gave us at the beginning of this was to have a very high recovery facility. So we're meeting all purity, we're achieving great purity. The industry loves the material that's being produced by this facility. But beyond that, what was very important was to achieve a good recovery. Testing week was last week, and we tested this facility under many, many angles, and all of the numbers are coming up that over 97% of what's recyclable coming into this facility gets recovered.
Rumpke built this facility with the future in mind. So whenever we make an investment, we always think about the long-term needs of our customers.
Using AI with an optic is something that we started doing early on a regular QC station. We had hyperspectral and we had artificial intelligence combined to make a decision on the regular sorting lines with the robot. We've then applied that at
So
the
yeah,
very
you've
fast
heard
speed of
AI
600
and
feet
robot.
per minute of those optics.
And they are both
We've
used
applied
extensively
those
in the
two
recycling
technology
industry.
together.
We're going to discuss
to make
this
the decision
in detail in a
to
little
be
bit.
able to reach the product quality that we have here.
This facility has 19 optical scanners, 9 of those equipped with artificial intelligence. This technology allows us to process material at a great rate of speed and be able to process new material types to serve our customers.
What's critically important here is that we are segregating two-dimensional, three-dimensional items using ballistics and optics and not using rotating screens or shafts like we did in our old facility. One of the unique things about this facility is that we use AI to identify plastics by shape, color, and size instead of just using AI and NIR. So the AI is telling the optic, or telling that burst of air, to blow that item off the belt at the right time in the right place to get it where it needs to go. So it's 100% automated, where we're cleaning up optics with optics with optics, allowing us to have the cleanest stream to go to the marketplace.
This facility can process 250,000 tons of material per year and will take recycling material from over 50 counties in Ohio, from across the state, from Lake Erie to the Ohio River.
Everything that's been coupled here makes this facility the most technologically advanced facility to this date. And this would not have been possible for us to provide 3 years ago. Technology brought us there. We're now able to analyze the signals from the AI and from hyperspectral and combine them together in the optics at very high belt speed to make the right decisions on ejections and the products that needs to be generated there.
We also wanted to take into consideration safety. When we built this plant.
So this goes on for a little bit, and obviously if you want to see the rest of it, you can get on YouTube and watch it yourself. They go on to talk about safety. There's a big education center here that's very important to a lot of recycling companies to educate people on the right thing to do. That's kind of where we're going to end this. What's the right thing for you to do? You've heard a lot of tech being thrown around, AI, NIR, robotics, things like that. They're all in use here, and we're going to talk about those. But I want to start by how we got here. Paul touched on it earlier. You know, we didn't always have the ability to go out to the curb with a bin and have it be picked up and away it goes, and who knows what happens there. It all started in World War II, really, with rubber drives and steel drives and even cooking oil drives and things like that, just to help with the war effort. That's really kind of how recycling started. You still kind of see some of that. I don't know if you guys have these guys, but even now we have guys going down the block on our recycling day. If you put a lot of metals out on your curb, you'll have a guy with a pickup truck and he'll come by and he'll take it in there. Hey, those guys are awesome. They're just earning a few bucks by picking that stuff up and taking it to a local metal shop. And that's really kind of how recycling got its roots. Then it was, like Paul was saying, back in the days of churches having paper drives or a Boy Scout troop having aluminum can drives. And they would have you bring all your stuff in and they would take it to a place that would then send it to a mill that would turn it into more newspaper or aluminum or what have you. And then back in around the 80s, we started to be able to put stuff out on the curb. And I see some contemporaries here, so you might remember this. You used to have to take your newspapers and put them over here, maybe put them in with twine, then your cardboard boxes here, your metals here, and then all your plastics over here. Guy would pull up in a truck, he would take this and throw it there, and this and throw it there, and this and throw it there. Can anybody figure out what the problem is with that? What's that? There's only one problem. Yeah, and that's the right answer. A lot of problems, right? Too much work, too much time, right? And dangerous. There's a guy standing on the curb, right, all that time next to, traffic. So the next step happened somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, and they called it dual stream. And it's where you could take all your papers, newspaper, corrugated cardboard, put those in one bin, and then put all your containers in another bin. Guy would come by, pretty much the same thing, but only two sorts, boom and boom. Problem is, one would always fill up before the other one. Plus, he still had to get out to do it. So better, but not great. Then back in the late 90s, I was fortunate enough to work for the company that developed the technology that allowed all of us to do what we're doing today in the United States, which is called single stream. So you combine all those streams, you put it in your big blue toter, and you put it on your curb. Then you've got your trash over here in your green toter, right? Guy comes by, what do you have now? Big automated arm comes out. Insurance companies love it, right? The companies that provide the hauling love it because it's quick, it's much safer, and it makes them a lot more money. However, because you have more convenience, the negative is you have to sort all that stuff out now. And when things came around to sort that out back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it took a lot of manual labor. A typical system would sort 1 ton of material per man per hour. So if you were doing 20 tons an hour of material, you had 20 laborers. And there was a lot of guys out there, a lot of guys and women sorting all this stuff, and it was very labor intensive. So it saved a lot on the hauling end, but it cost a lot on the equipment end. So The other thing with that is that the material stream evolves. We made a joke about newspaper. When I designed these systems, by the way, that's what I did for most of my career here. When we first started designing the systems back in like the early 2000s, can anybody guess what percentage of a recycling stream was newspaper? 50, I heard somebody say it. Half of the recycling volume was newspaper. Things have changed just a little bit between nobody reading newspapers anymore and a little company called Amazon. When was the last time you ordered something on Amazon? You get it in one box? Hell no. You got a box, in a box, in a box, and sometimes in a box. So all of that needs to be recycled. So when you see the systems that are out there right now, it's now 50% corrugated cardboard. So the other thing about these systems and about the techniques of recycling is it has to evolve, and it has to be able to evolve because the stream evolves all the time. And that's kind of where we're sitting right now. So this is what we're doing in the United States. You have two bins. You've got your recyclables and you've got your non-recyclables. But it's not that way in every country. And one of the main questions I get is, isn't Europe way ahead of us in recycling? I mean, we're kind of lagging behind, right? The answer is no. That's not actually the case at all. It's just that their needs are different over there. And because of the needs they have, a lot of the tech for recycling comes out of Europe. Why is that? Well, when your country, I'll use the Netherlands as an example because I worked for a Dutch company for 20 years. In the Netherlands, they're the size of the state of Delaware. You going to want to fill that up with landfills? I don't think so, right? You are doing everything that you can to keep your waste out of the ground. So what do? You recycle what you can. You subsidize, if you're the government, you subsidize ways to turn other things into a fuel product, and you turn it into electricity. You burn it cleanly with ways to turn turbines, just like we have here. It's not necessarily cost effective, but it's a heck of a lot better than burying the stuff and using up all your land just to put trash in, right? So, and not only that, but the Dutch way of life is different. They don't need single stream because they go to the store on their bikes every day. Their refrigerators are like you have in college, right? And to them, when they buy a thing of pop for the family for a week, it's about this big, right? So they go every day. So when they go to the store, they take all their recyclables back, tied to the back of their bike, and they put them back. So they don't need single stream recycling. But what they need to do is figure out ways to handle some of the other materials, and that's where they're different from here. Germany does a little bit different. They have a product called DSD, which is basically all the dry materials go in over here, and all the organics and wet materials go in there. They compost the wet materials, and they turn it into whatever, top fill for golf courses, whatever you can. But that's their need. Here in the United States, in the UK, Australia, and a few other countries, single stream is the way because it financially makes the most sense. The other advantage of single stream, and somebody said it over here about participation. One of the things that they didn't realize would be as big a factor as it is when they went to single stream was participation went way up because it's easier, right? However, can anybody tell me what maybe one of the problems could be?
They don't read the little number to see whether it's supposed to be in there or not.
Exactly. And thank you for knowing the little numbers, by the way. Anybody know what this one is? It's a number 1, close, PET. Number 2 would be like Tide bottles and things like that. So, there are a lot of issues in the recycling industry. I mean, there really are. And contamination is one of them. Let's just say that you've had a long week and You look over and you have one trash bin and it's full, but your recycling bin is only half full. Who's going to know, right? But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the well-intended people, like everybody in this room, that don't know exactly what to put in their bin. And we're going to talk about that at the very end, and I'm going to tell you exactly what to put in there if you really want to help your local recycler. Because there are also things, certain numbers, that although they are recyclable, they don't get recycled. Because all that you see here, it's wonderful to save the planet and to help the environment, but it's a business. And we live in a capitalistic society, and if you can't make money at it, you're not going to stay in business. So, styrofoam, right? It's recyclable. You absolutely could take styrofoam, break it down, and make more styrofoam. How much styrofoam do you think you need to make like 1 ton of styrofoam? Yeah, like this room. You can't make any money at it. So technically, is it recyclable? But it's not going to get recycled. There are things that have been added recently, fairly recently actually, that are being recycled now that didn't used to be. Anybody have any idea what that might be? Ever see a milk carton lately? You don't see them too often, but milk cartons didn't used to have the little chasing arrows on the bottom of them. But the Carton Council said, you know what we're going to do? Because this is a recyclable product, we are going to put equipment in a lot of these MRFs, material recovery facilities, to get this stuff out of there, and then we're going to go ahead and recycle it. And they built up enough of an infrastructure where now you can recycle that, and there's enough money in it to do it. So you can add new things, but it's a gargantuan effort to do that. So I touched on one of the problems, and that's, I'll call it dumping. Once a year, I get an email from somebody that says, yeah, see, you know, I just found out that somebody in Sioux City, Iowa, or wherever, they took a trash truck and they picked up recyclables and they dumped it in the landfill. That happens. But I will also tell you that that's very rare. I have been in hundreds of these material recovery facilities, and I've seen millions of tons of material being recycled. So when you read about that, just know that it's one bad apple in the barrel. It's not at all the norm. A lot of the questions I get too are about the rivers of plastics that you see in Indonesia. You know, I saw these videos and pictures of these beaches in Indonesia and rivers that are nothing but water bottles and not enough water. And that is a problem, and we're doing something to address that, which I will tell you about in a second. The other thing we talked about, contamination, right? Contamination levels used to be 7-8% of what came in at the door. Now they're 20% because you can hide it easier. So guys like these guys have to figure out ways to deal with that, because that gets put on a big system like this, and it's got to come out somewhere, usually at the end. Another problem is companies that develop marketing materials or packaging that is not good for recyclables. I'll give you a great example. When was the last time you went down a soup aisle? Okay, everybody knows Campbell's soup, right? Easy, right? Red, white, chicken noodle, and underneath it is a nice tin can that's forever recyclable. That's great. But somebody in the marketing department said, I'm going to take this cool pouch and I'm going to put a picture on it of a loving mother with her children right there, and she's pouring them a cup of soup. And won't everybody love to see that picture with the kids smiling up at the mother and saying, you know, I love you and all this other stuff? Great. It's great for marketing. You walk down the aisle, you're like, I want to feel that way. You know, I'm going to grab that and do that. What about this white can? I don't care about that. Problem is that package has 5 different layers, and it is not recyclable at all. So that's a big problem. The last and most important problem is a hot one: fires. $100 million, you know how quickly that can be gone? like that. This company, Rumpke, who I actually have worked with on a number of occasions, I had equipment in their Cincinnati plant. I was over in Europe on business, and I get a call saying, we just went up in smoke. They call it a hot load, came in, and the next thing you know, their plant was gone. So there's stuff you can do about that, but before I get into that, do you know what causes most fires in these facilities? What do I have in here? Lithium-ion batteries. You know what happens when you run over a lithium-ion battery with one of these trucks, or you cut it, or it goes on the equipment and gets hit? And when it's surrounded by paper, what happens next? So I'm going to show you a video here in a second of what we're doing. So these are the problems, okay? And the fires are actually the biggest problem, because I personally know of maybe a dozen large facilities that have gone up in smoke. You want to try getting insurance for these things? Forget about it, right? But there are things that we're doing to battle this stuff. So what are our responses to these issues? So packaging. There is a big movement right now, and it's successfully happening. It is the law in Canada, in California, and about 5 other states. It's end-of-life packaging responsibility. So you have to do something with your packaging, as somebody like Procter & Gamble, who's coming up with Dove soap or what have you. You are responsible to make sure that your packaging has a place to go at the end of its life. And that, we always say in the United States, whatever in the recycling industry starts in California and then it moves east. So we're seeing that in other countries, in Canada, in California, Minnesota, and a few other states, but it is definitely coming in this direction. And that's a positive step. And all it's saying is, look, you can't make your packaging out of something that's not recyclable, because that's not good for anybody. So that's how we're combating that. As far as contamination goes, education. These guys, if you watch the rest of this video, and again, I didn't want to bore you with it, they have a huge education facility where they bring school children in and they teach them what I'm going to tell you at the very end. What's recyclable, what's not, what can you do to help the environment, and why you should do it as well. So education helps with that. As far as, and the river of plastics. And you've all heard of the Texas-sized plastic thing in the ocean, right? The Pacific Ocean, right? That's real. That's all real. What's going on is we're handling this stuff domestically now. Good intended companies were selling bottles to overseas organizations that they thought were recycling, and they weren't. So what's happening is companies like, you may have heard of Republic Services, they're the second largest in the industry. They have recently opened 2 and are now opening a 3rd facility to handle just this stuff. So we're keeping it domestically, and then we know we're closing the loop. In fact, that's what they call themselves, a closed loop. That way they know that they're taking the stuff, they're flaking it up, and they're selling it domestically to somebody who's going to turn it into another water bottle. So it's not going overseas anymore and just disappearing onto your favorite beach. Fires. So I worked for a short period for a company called Fire Rover. I'm going to show you a video of something that...
And it's part of our DNA. It's definitely part of...
Let me do this here. So this is something that can now be done. So you see guys are trying to put it out, but you can't. You see this cannon right here? This is an automated piece of equipment. And that's it. It's what this company does, and almost every facility has it now. What this company does is they use what's called a FLIR camera, which is a military grade heat detecting camera. And they have it throughout their system. They've got these cameras going, and it's monitored 24/7, and a computer recognizes on the screen if it sees a hot spot. It alerts somebody. There's specific, oh, that's still going. That specific foam, and it's biodegradable and all that, that's designed to put out these fires. So just about every system that you see that's costing $30, $50, $100 million is now putting this piece of equipment in because you can't have it burned down. And lithium ion battery fires happen every day in the industry. And if they don't get caught, then you lose a big, big chunk of money. So the recycling system in the United States is not without problems, but we really are going and finding ways to help with those problems. So, all right, so we want to talk a little bit about tech because you've heard some of the cool stuff we're using. So, what are the products that we want to get out of your single stream? Let's name them off. Anybody? Aluminum? Glass?
Certain types of plastic.
Plastics, particularly, and I'll go with this, soda bottles, pop bottles, right? That's called PET.
Corrugated.
Corrugated cardboard. Tide bottles, right? Ferris, right? Anything else? Paper.
Milk cartons, because you said that's an issue.
Milk cartons. And that's pretty much it. Okay, that's what we want to get out. So, you have this luxury of putting stuff in one bin and away it goes. And hopefully you believe that 3 or 4 months, it's going to show up as another bottle or can. And that's pretty much what happens. But it takes a lot to get there. You saw in that video. So it used to be that there was a lot, like I said, a lot of manual separation. Now we're getting to the point, I just visited a plant in Plainfield that does 35 tons an hour of this material, and they have 4 people on there. That's it. The rest of it is automated. And the type of automation that we're using, I'm going to start with optical sorting. Optical sorting is something that has now been around for 15, 20, almost 20 years now. Yeah, I'm looking at my wife because she knows about all this stuff. So this has been something that is, when it came out, it was revolutionary and now has become relatively commonplace. So you see that there are a lot of conveyors in these systems, right? So you've got a conveyor. When you want to get rid of a specific plastic, whether you're capturing it or you want it out of it, what this does is there's a box that hangs over the conveyor. And the conveyor is running at like 600 feet a minute, which, try and run that fast, you can't do it. It's shining a beam of near-infrared light down on the belt. You can't see it with your eye. It's out of our visual spectrum. You can see that the belt is lit up, but you can't see the light itself. Now, on here, you've got all your bottles and cans and whatever else. It is tracking everything that goes on there. And when it goes underneath that near-infrared light, it looks for the reflection off of whatever goes underneath there. By the reflection that it gets, it has an algorithm that creates a sine wave. And it matches it up with known sine waves for things like PET, HDPE, corrugated, things like that. And at the very end, you heard him say something about the air blowing. I don't know if you were paying attention to that part of the video. It's an array of air nozzles set very close together. And the system has literally already made an outline of exactly what that plastic looks like. So it knows how long it is, how short it is, how tall it is, all that. And so when it gets to this point, if it wants to eject it, either onto a conveyor that's going to take it into a bin or into a bin itself, it fires those air nozzles for the exact size and duration for the length to shoot that and eliminate it off that conveyor automatically. And it does it faster than you when you're in there, it sounds like somebody's making popcorn. And you can do this with anything that offers a reflection that would go on the belt. It's used highly in plastics and a little bit now in fiber, because the problem with fiber, it's very voluminous, right? You have to go, like if you're trying to get newspaper, let's say, out of there, you have to go single sheet, right? So when you used to have a lot of newspaper in there, you couldn't do it because you just couldn't spread it out enough. Now that there's less, people are starting to do it a lot more. What they're actually doing is they cover this whole thing and shoot air down, and then they run the belt at like 1,400 feet a minute, which they couldn't do before, because what happens if you put a piece of paper on a really fast moving belt? No. Well, it could. It blows away. It just it gravitates right off of the belt. But if you blow air down on it, it stays on there. So again, these innovations that happen all the time. This happened first, this came along later because people wanted to do, yeah, go ahead.
So if you just had a full plastic bottle like you've got there, but someone crushed another one completely down, it's gonna know that too?
Yeah. Well, and we're gonna get, okay, and I'm glad you asked that question, because here's the next step. This is what we've been using in the industry for, like I said, maybe 20 years. Now, AI, right? Say what you want about AI. Here's what we're doing in the recycling industry. We show a hyperspectral camera. Are you making fun of me over there? My wife is making fun. We show a hyperspectral camera, a million of these, in all shapes, forms, labels, sizes, whatever. We say, this is a PET bottle. So now, instead of an NIR sensor, near infrared sensor, it's a hyperspectral camera, just really, really precise camera. And so when it sees this bottle going down there, it goes, oh yeah, I've seen one that looks just like that before. That's a PET bottle. And they shoot it out. That's the latest technology. Actually, that MRF that we saw in that first video is one of the very first ones to get that technology. And it just makes sense, right? Because not only do you train that AI initially with all this stuff, and the same goes, by the way, for a Tide bottle, okay, for if you're trying to get out your HDPE, you can do it with the different colors of the bottles, right? You've got milk jugs and Tide bottles are made of the same thing, but you can't recycle them together. You need the natural, which is your like opaque milk jugs, and then your Tide bottles are orange or bright white or something like that. Those are two different things. Well, camera can easily tell colors apart, so that gives you that extra technology, and you still use that air at the very end to shoot it out. Now, this isn't 100%. So again, in the video, you may have heard him say we use optics to then sort, optics to then sort. So a lot of times what's going on, and I remember going to a German facility many, many years ago, they had just that. You would shoot out the PET bottles, water bottles, and then they would have another optical sorter shooting out anything that wasn't PET in that stream that got shot out. Because, occasionally you make a mistake, right? Or something is too close to this and it goes with it. So anything then that's not PET gets shot out, and so you get a clean PET stream. But you might miss some of these, so then they had another line that would then recover the ones they missed with the first one. And as Americans, we're like, are you out of your minds? Hire a couple guys at $5 an hour and have them pull that stuff out. What's the big deal? Well, what the big deal is right now is Amazon just opened a distribution center a mile away from that recycling facility. And that recycling facility, that one's really clean. They ain't all that clean. And in Amazon, you work in a room like this. In these, you're open to the environment. It's dusty. You may be picking around dirty diapers. It ain't a lot of fun. So it's really hard to find labor. That's why these systems have become so extensive, have used so much technology, and have become so expensive as well. So now we are at that same point where we do recovery units and we do quality control units as well. So the other thing I want to show you is robotics were mentioned. So, well, here, let me show you a video of. So this is actually one of these optical sorting units in action, sorting out plastics. So you can see the light shining on the belt there. It's tracking each of these pieces that's on the belt. And then you'll get a little better view of it kicking it off here in a second. So those little slots, that's where the air is coming out. And if it wants to eject something, it ejects it and it goes over the separation unit. See how some of them are going in, hitting that back wall there? And you hear how fast that is? Milliseconds. And there's the output products, the end stream. So you can do it either with color or with type. Now the thing that everybody got all crazy about a few years ago, robotics. Yeah.
So since it's going so fast, how does that stop, like, how do you make sure errors don't happen since it's going, the conveyor belt's going?
Excellent question. How do you make sure that errors don't happen? So, well, first of all, they do. It's a percentage game, right? So if you're 98% accurate, but you're sending 1 million of these things over a day, that's still a lot. That's why they have more units down the road to get the stuff they missed and to eject the stuff that's in the stuff that they don't want, right? However, this is all controlled by computers that know exactly what's going on. They trace every single, you can't even believe it, but each of those things that you see has been identified and traced in the computer, and it knows exactly what it shot on and what it didn't. Most of the errors happen when you get stuff that's laying on top of you. So let's say it says, okay, I've got a PET bottle right here. I'm going to shoot it, but there's something laying on top. It might shoot it with it. But you can't believe how actually accurate this stuff is. And it does actually trace it all the way. So one of the things, again, that Chris Hahn, the guy who did the big system in Columbus, talked about is later on down in a lot of the new systems, they have just detectors that tell you what the makeup is of what's going underneath them. So let's say we'll use the PET bottles as an example. They'll look at all the PET bottles that are going to the baler. You saw the big, what looked like hay bales, right? That's how it gets packed into trucks and sent to be made at the mill, more of these. They'll actually do analysis. Oh, well, what went into the PET bin was 93% or 98.3% PET and whatever. So they can actually tell what the purity level is later on. One of the things that helps with this is the advent of robotics. Robotics, what do you think a robot looks like in one of these facilities? You think it's, is it the robot that's out of, Isaac Asimov or iRobot or... They actually, bless you, they actually tried some of those. It actually looks like this. I'll show you.
Something that a lot of people don't realize is that this material they put in the recycling bin really has value. The problem is that the cost of extracting these materials relies a great deal on manual labor. If you can automate this and reduce the cost of extracting these commodities, recycling starts to become this phenomenal business. What you'll see for each of our systems is a vision system up front, and it's looking at each individual piece of material. A little bit
So this
down the
also
conveyor belt from
answers
there,
your
you'll actually see
question,
the robot itself
how they
that is
trace
taking
each
advantage of this
individual piece
information
of
to
material. You
sort
see that?
thousands
They
or
know
tens
exactly.
of thousands
And
of
that is what a
items,
robot
and then
looks
they
like.
send it to what's called a baler, and they create these huge compressed cubes of each commodity that they can then sell. Every piece of technology that we've deployed is networked together, and they all can upload examples of different objects. We then have algorithms and humans that go through this data set and say, oh, this is a bottle, this is a can, and create this big database of examples of all of these different materials. How many objects has our system identified? And right now that number sits at over 50 billion. That gets downloaded to all of our pieces of tech. All of them are using common neural networks that have learned from one another. So we have systems in Japan that have learned from robots in the United States.
And this
We have
is the
robots
cool
in the
thing.
United States that have learned
They've
from
already
systems in
shown
Europe, and
50
then that
billion
information can be used in a
PET
number of
bottles
different
to
ways.
this thing.
How many bottles
And then
came through?
each
How many cans
day,
came through?
all
What's
of
the
their
purity of
units
this paper
also
stream?
say,
That data can
here's
also be used
another
to guide a robot to
couple
actually pick out
100,000.
contaminants or
I'm going to
pick out the good
upload to
stuff.
you, and this is also what
So
they
you can
look
see
like.
things like
So it
coffee
just keeps
cups
growing.
or yogurt tubs that are getting recycled much more often now, and in some places that is because of our robotic systems. I think we'll continue to see broader and broader classes of material that you're allowed to now put in the recycling bin and have assurance that it's going to be diverted from the landfill. Over the next several years, you can see a pretty clear and reasonable path to millions of tons of CO2 saved, and then if we do what we're really aiming for, hundreds of millions of tons.
So that is what a robot looks like in the recycling industry. So robots, a few years ago, everybody went crazy. Oh, wow, that is the coolest tech. The AI is wonderful, and we're going to put this in. And the AI is wonderful, but there are two aspects to it. There's the identification and the acquisition. Identification, whether it's by near-infrared light or by AI, the hyperspectral cameras, is outstanding with this stuff because of all this uploading and downloading and everything. The industry's still having trouble with the acquisition. Those suction cups, those crinkled things, they don't really have a good surface to grab that. Plus you get a bag in there, a grocery bag or something, it gets jammed up. So what the industry has realized is that there are places for robotics, and it's usually on quality control or on the line that's going out to the trash to recover anything that was missed by the whole system. And then they send it back to the front of the system for another shot at it, basically. So those are, yeah.
What if someone stuck a cigarette in a bottle or they left the cap on? What happens then?
So what, yeah, good question. So what each company can identify it the way they want. Most people leave their caps on, and that's okay. It's all right if your cap is on because they want the predominant, PET. It will know, because actually the funny thing is most of the caps are HDPE, but they'll still say take it because they can handle that at the mill. Okay. That is usually the secondary processors thing, but things do happen. You put this in a Chicago winter filled with water, you try and shoot it out with those air nozzles or pick it up with that robot, you think that's going to happen? No. That's a problem, right? So kind of leads, we're about to get into the discussion of what can you do, right? The other thing I want to say before we get into that is today I've talked about residential recycling because it's the one that we can control ourselves. It's the biggest by far in the United States. But let's not forget that there's construction and demolition recycling. You tear down this building, a lot of this stuff can be recovered and recycled. There's e-scrap, right? All this stuff is recyclable. There's commercial, which is like your big box stores, right? Kohl's, Best Buy, places like that. They've got a lot of recyclable stuff. All of those things are very important, obviously, but they're a much smaller segment of the industry, so I've been concentrating on this. But you can, there's lots of information out there if you want to look at some of this other stuff. We do, by the way, in the United States, have some waste to energy and waste to fuel plants. Not too many here in Illinois. There are some up in Minnesota, some out on the West Coast, where they are actually turning some of the non-recyclable stuff into a fuel that can be used. Indianapolis has a big one. Covanta is the name of the company. So they're out there. It's just that they're hard to get right, and it's easier to do what we're doing right now, and it's also more lucrative, by the way. So, all right, so what can you do? Those of us in this room, what can we do to help our local recyclers?
One of them is don't put greasy pizza boxes in there.
Actually, that's not true. I'm glad you said that. So they just this year, I'm glad you said that because that's a very good point. That has been a big question for years. Does the grease and maybe a little leftover cheese, because they set a pizza on top of a pizza, harm the process of turning that into more cardboard? And finally this year, after like a 2-year study, they found out that no, it's okay. So, I mean, if you've got a whole piece of cheese stuck there, pull it off.
Is that a nationwide thing or a local thing?
So it is, they are still telling people not to do it, okay? But the study has come out, and I read it myself, that a little grease on there is going to be okay. My dad and I had many conversations about what his recyclables should look like. He washed everything out, scraped the peanut butter out of his jars, didn't leave an ounce of Dr. Pepper in his cans. I would have loved to have taken him to one of these facilities and just walked around and seen the 40,000 other pieces that didn't look half as clean as his. So just be smart, right? Don't put a jar of peanut butter in there, But if there's a little left in, they'll deal with that. It's high temperature burning on a lot of these cases, or they wash it themselves and flake it out. The biggest thing you can do, though, is, and this is the phrase I always use, when in doubt, throw it out. The best thing you can do is to not clog up these systems with toasters, frying pans. Hey, that's metal, that's recyclable, right? They don't want it. There's an avenue for that. Take it to your local scrap guy. Put it in a big box, wait till you have enough, take it to your local scrap guy or scrap drive. When you put your bin out on the curb, put your newspapers, junk mail, cardboard boxes, water bottles, your pop bottles, your tin cans, your aluminum cans. Don't put the any hairspray stuff in there though. Just your pop and beer cans, please. And your glass. And if you don't get your glass in there, don't feel too bad about that either. Because glass, although recyclable and recycled, is a loser.
Too much heat, right?
It's the energy that it takes to burn it down. But it also, you've seen the conveyor belts and all the sophisticated equipment. Imagine throwing sand on all that. I mean, that's what glass is, right? Break glass, it turns basically into sand. Now, when we first were designing these systems, we thought, hey, we'll put places at the end where they can sort out the different color of bottles and recover those. Well, I remember the first system, guys were just standing there. It's like, because there were no bottles coming across. It was just pieces of glass because it gets broken and all that, right? And all that processing. Now we've gotten to the point where we're sophisticated enough, you get the glass out right away. The broken glass comes out. In fact, we break it on purpose with metal disc screens. Break it on purpose, get it out of there, and then clean it up with air systems and things like that and sell to a guy who's going to melt it down and make more glass. However, it's a loser. That's mostly done for political reasons because people want to. But if you throw your wine bottle in the trash, you're not doing that much harm to anybody. So just be smart about what you put in there. Especially don't put anything in there like Christmas lights, hoses, VHS tapes, and anybody still have those? That's the stuff that can really screw up the equipment. So again, when in doubt, throw it out. Yes, ma'am.
When in doubt, just go online and your company will tell you.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, and everybody's a little bit different, but those are really the ones that you can throw in. Oh, and also the gable tops or the cartons, as they call it.
So I have this running debate with my wife.
Uh-oh.
I'm an optimist.
You're going to put me in the middle of this now.
Yeah, I
Great,
am.
thanks a lot.
I'm an optimistic recycler, and I end up throwing stuff into the recycle bin, and she goes, no, you can't do that. Here's the list of things. And so I'm kind of caught, and so what she is doing is ordering boxes from a company called TerraCycle,
Yeah, I know TerraCycle.
which is then recycling everything else, but we have to pay for these boxes, and we stuff them absolutely as full as we can get them. Why can't we get that other stuff? There's got to be a market where you can use that stuff. If TerraCycle is making a go of it, why can't we make a go with the stuff that's in the TerraCycle box?
Good question. First of all, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong and your wife is right. However, you're wrong and your wife is right. Yeah, and listen, I get that question all the time. Only put the stuff in there that we've talked about, please. That is the best thing you can do for your local recycler, because they have a system similar to this where anything else that goes on there either has to be picked out by hand or ends up clogging up the system and then going out the end into the trash anyway, okay? So, why can't you do it? Same reason we don't collect styrofoam. You're already spending $100 million. You want to add a loser product financially, you've got to have another 1, 2, or 3 of these at $500,000 a pop. Might need another robot at $500,000 a pop. All that stuff to get it out of there, it doesn't make fiscal sense. Remember, it's still a business, right? TerraCycle has their own business. They're going to handle stuff like that, just like Safety Clean handles, the liquids that you don't want to deal with. TerraCycle handles the other stuff like that, and they have contracted specifically with people to handle some of that stuff. They could very well get some competition one of these days, but for right now, they're the ones that are doing that. So, you.
Thank you. How much do you hate 3D printing?
First of all, my son owns about 5 of them, so I don't, and half of the stuff we have in our house has been 3D printed. It depends on the material that they're using, because a lot of it is PETG. And that's fine. PETG can be recycled.
That's what the water bottle is, right?
So, yeah, well, this is PET. PETG has a slightly different melting point. It's more popular in Canada. You know what else is PETG? Is the black food trays that you go to wherever, Mariano's or whatever, and you put. So that's PETG. It does have a different melting point, and there are some places that collect it, some places that don't, some places that put them together. Depends on the contract and where they're sending it. It's an interesting question. There's not enough of that to be a problem yet. I don't know if it ever will. But it brings up an interesting point. Remember what we talked about where this needs a reflection to create that sine wave in the algorithm so that it knows what it is? What's the problem with black plastics?
Doesn't reflect a whole lot.
No reflection. That same thing with, so when we get into e-scrap recycling, what do you think the problem is with that? Same thing. Almost every computer that you see has black on it, any laptop, things like that. So they are starting to develop a technology that will work for that using lasers. I mean, this is how sophisticated this is getting. They do it, they're already using it with shape recognition and some other things, but they're hopefully we'll be able to do that as well. But that PETG tray has been a problem up until recently. Yes?
Is white paper and plastic recycling profitable?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Very, very much so. So I mean, you look at Waste Management and Republic. There have been years, they're the two biggest in the country. There have been years when their recycling divisions are what drove them into profitability. A lot of that, what I'm doing right now, by the way, is my company USM is based here in Chicago. We buy bales of the UBCs, the aluminum cans that come off of these systems, and a lot of them can't get it clean enough because they need to be 99% clean. Otherwise, the smelters have a big issue. So that product of all of them has to be the cleanest. So we buy these contaminated bales and we clean them up and then we sell them directly to the smelters. And I lost my train of thought promoting my. Yeah. So is it profitable? It's very profitable. All of it is profitable, or they wouldn't be doing it. The markets though can dictate it, right? I mean, there have been years. There was a year when I first got involved. Corrugated cardboard, when I signed the contract to get into this industry, was $200 a ton. By the time I took my job, it had dropped to 20. And so when you say, is it profitable? Well, these companies have learned to use their contracts so that they base it on the markets. Because there was a guy in Boston that didn't do that when single stream first started. He just said, I'm paying $80 a ton, bring me your tons of single stream. I want it. Then all of a sudden the market crashes and a ton of single stream wasn't worth $80, plus he had his processing costs. He was losing like $50 for every ton he processed, but he had to because he was under contract. So what companies have learned to do is they now base their pricing and their contracts on what the different contracts are. So way in the back there. Go ahead. Oh.
Sorry, I didn't think you were going to hear me if I started yelling.
You're a first timer. Come on.
So for the optical sorting, if there was a battery that got through there and like the camera spray thingy.
Yeah.
I don't know the technical term, my bad. If a battery like exploded in that and it was around all of the other pieces of plastic and paper and stuff like that, would that water like destroy the machines? Like,
so this is
would it be?
Oh, you mean the?
Yeah, like in the conveyor belt, if there was a battery that exploded, like, would there be any way to salvage it and keep the machine working with like using the new technology with the?
Yeah, good question. When a battery explodes and a fire starts, losing part of this piece of equipment is inconsequential compared to losing a $100 million system. So they're more worried about putting the fire out. And actually where a lot of fires start is either at the very beginning of the system, because that's where stuff gets exposed, or even in the storage where they're storing the stuff to then go into the baler and get squished up into these cubes. That's where a lot of these things start. And with those areas, there's not a lot of tech equipment there. So their first concern isn't whether they're going to damage this or not. Their first concern is getting that fire out. Otherwise, they could lose the whole place. Because think about it. It used to be that a typical sprinkler system, like you have anywhere and here, whatever, used to be the only thing that they would do. But there are so many layers. I don't know if you saw the video. There's so many layers in this system that if a fire starts down here, you can't count on a sprinkler system to get down there. Besides, in the dead of winter in Columbus, Ohio, that sprinkler system is not charged. There's no water in there because it would freeze. So first it's a dry system. They have to charge it, then get it, and by that time the whole place is up in smoke. So you have to have something that can react with like a cannon that can shoot anywhere and get that.
How much of this is regulation driven, and what changes do you expect with the new administration?
certain aspects are regulation driven, like I said, the packaging. There are very few mandates to recycle. It's mostly driven by the corporations. The big guys do it because they know people want it, and it's part of their DNA now, right? We are waste management. We don't just pick up your stuff and bury it in the ground and pollute. We are also the world's biggest recycler, and aren't we wonderful? So that's really what's driving them, and they found a way to make money at it. So it's more capitalism than it is regulation at this point. Certain things, like when you get into waste to energy and waste to fuel, then you start getting into regulation as far as the outputs and things like that. That's obviously highly regulated because you're putting things into the atmosphere. As far as the new administration goes, hard to say. They're pretty business friendly, so I think they're going to take any restrictions off and say, do what you want.
Lately, I've been seeing, I think it's hummus, a brand of hummus, and on the bottom you've got little arrows, but it's got a line. It's got a line through it. My daughter refuses to take that brand of hummus. It's not Sabras or one of the others. It's a small one. I've never seen that on any other product.
I can't imagine. Well, first of all, if they put the chasing arrows on there, that means it's recyclable. Otherwise, by law, no, there's regulation right there. You're not allowed to just put chasing arrows on there. So if it's not recyclable, they wouldn't have it on there at all. Why they would have first of all, I can't imagine a product that they would use to put
Yeah, it was hummus.
Because it's got to be food grade.
Right.
You got me on that one. Anybody? Anybody know? Paul, you eat a lot of hummus, don't you?
I do eat hummus.
Okay. Any idea on that?
Well, I was just going to ask you, speaking of what did you call them? Chasing arrows?
Chasing arrows.
What numbers are recyclable?
What's not? Hummus? Okay, there you go. Thank you. I've never seen that before. Yeah, I wouldn't buy that hummus either then.
No, no.
Thank you, Laura, my assistant. So, okay, there's the question. What are the chasing arrows, the numbers that are recyclable? 1, 2, 5. 1 is PET, I got you next. PET, HDPE, and polypropylene, number 5. Polypropylene's like yogurt cups, things like that. That's for that. Mint things. Thank you, my lovely wife. Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to put in a plug for a newspaper because I used to write for one.
Outstanding.
The Chicago Tribune. The Tom Skilling weather page. On the lower right corner, there's a column called The Planet Watch.
Okay.
And I used to write it.
Outstanding.
Yeah. And when there was a question for the Ask Tom Why column, if it had to do with astronomy, like aurora or comets coming or something like that, they'd throw the question to me.
Excellent.
To do that. So I used to write for it. Anyway, my first encounter with recycling was at a place called North Park Village, which is on the northwest side of Chicago.
Okay.
It used to be the tuberculosis sanitarium. But anyway, they converted it into senior housing and laboratory facilities for arts and crafts, which I was taking advantage of because I was in the arts and crafts. But the parking lot between the administration building and the recreation center was very large. So they set up a side for recycling. And the guy who was doing it, apparently he had his facility, main facility near the little Calumet River on the exact opposite corner of the city. But he'd come with his truck and bring the containers. And he used to have separation for all kinds of things, including the glass. Brown glass, green glass, clear glass. Now, this is back in the mid-1980s. What has changed since then? I mean, I'm getting, there's a lot of changes, but what would he have been doing differently than now?
Well, first of all, that was obviously very manually driven, right? I mean, there just wasn't the technology, so he probably just had a lot of people out there sorting it out. As far as the glass goes, it's still done that way. They use something like this, the optical sorter with the near infrared light, but they just look for color. In fact, the guys Rumpke that I showed you, they've got a glass sorting facility in Dayton, Ohio. They take all their glass and a bunch of other people's glass, and they sort it out by cullet color, and then they sell it to a place like Strategic or somebody like that, Strategic Materials, and then they actually take it and they melt it down.
Just one more quick thing. The Tribune company was sold to some outfit in Dallas, and they kicked Tom off. And the page has become laughable. I mean, it's just a joke to look at it. They're full of errors. They must get all kinds of complaints. It's crazy to look at. Anyway, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so 2 questions. First question is, like, where do we know, like, where all that recyclable material is going? Like, who's it going to?
So it depends on where you live. Every town has a different contract. And the funny thing is like, you may have a hauler that picks it up, but they may take it to somebody else's facility. It depends on who they have a contract with, who's ever closest. It's usually not that far away because it's just not economical to be schlepping this stuff all over the place. There are transfer stations, they call them, right, where it's just a big open building where they may pick up in a garbage truck what looks like, you can compact to up to 19 PSI, 19 pounds per square inch, and not embed the glass in the paper. So they can, you'll see them compacting this stuff, and that's okay. They take it and then they put it like just on the floor, and then I'll just use this as an example. There might be a drive under for the big, huge 40-foot trucks that have an open top, and then they just push the recyclables in that open top, and they might take that to a facility like this one. I don't know if you guys saw, but right at the beginning, you could see a trailer being tipped up. That's just called a tipper. We're not too innovative in the recycling industry. And it just tips the stuff onto that tip floor, and then they put it on the system. So the answer is every major city has facilities like this. It's just hard to know, depending on where you live, it could go anywhere. Like ours now, I live in Naperville, are going to this plant in Plainfield that I just visited a couple weeks ago. There used to be one right here in Glen Ellen in DuPage County on North Avenue that Waste Management ran years ago. That's been closed. But it goes somewhere pretty close usually.
So just to clarify, so once it's done through like a facility like this one, where does it go next? That's kind of what
where does the stuff go?
Yeah.
The products. So the fibers, the newspapers, the junk mail, the OCC, they go to different mills. So for instance, corrugated cardboard, there's a company called Pratt Industries, huge buyer of corrugated cardboard. They've got facilities in Indiana, all throughout the country. They will go there, they put it they make it a slurry basically, they put it in water and some chemicals, bust it up, get it down to the fibers, and then they reconstitute it and make it into more corrugated cardboard. Same with newspaper or the sheet, the junk mail, things like that. Aluminum and tin are eminently recyclable. They get melted back down and then built back up. By the way, interesting thing, does anybody have a can with them by any chance? No? Yeah, so if you look at that, one thing I didn't know, the top of a can is a different grade of aluminum than the rest of it. So they literally like chop it off and they send it into 2 different spots. Yeah, I didn't even know that until I started working for this company.
Are there still bimetallic cans with steel tops, or are they gone?
I've never seen one of those. And that would probably go, I don't know if you saw the big magnet that's in there, but all these facilities, I didn't bore you with that, but they all have a huge magnet that pulls out the tin cans. So, yeah, I've not seen anything like that, but those get melted down. And the plastics go to facilities that first do a sort of their own. They've got a ton of these to make sure that it's absolutely pure, that everything is either number 1 or number 2, same colors, things like that. Then they take it, they flake it up. In other words, they turn into itty-bitty little flakes. Then they sort the flakes again to make sure that they're all pure. And they use a similar technology, but with much cooler design. Anyway, because they're little flakes, and each little flake is identified and sorted. And then they get melted down and turned into another one of these or what have you.
Okay, so sorry, one last thing. What was level 2 recycling again? Because you mentioned the numbers, and I don't remember what you said for number 2.
Oh, number 2 is, it's called HDPE, and that is Tide bottles and milk jugs.
Okay.
And that's natural is the milk jug, and colored is the.
Yeah, can you comment on the value of the different bundles when they're done?
What day is it? It
So just do a distribution for a large plant in terms of their revenue from tin versus plastic versus paper.
the most valuable product by weight is aluminum. Always has been, known as the angel product, whatever. Like I said, I've seen corrugated cardboard at $200 a ton. I've seen it at $20 a ton. When I designed these systems, one of the first things we would do is do an analysis of what a ton is worth at that point in time. And you've got all the products that make you money. Then you have to see what is the contamination level, 20%. Well, how much does it take you then, how much money to take it to a landfill and bury it for $50 a ton? So that's a negative, right? Then glass is actually worth usually about -15 because it's heavy to haul and you don't really get paid, but it's still better than -50 by $35 a ton. That's why you recycle it, not because it makes you money, but because it's better than throwing it in the landfill for you financially. So I've seen a ton of single stream worth as much as $130 a ton aggregate and as little as $39 a ton aggregate. And when you have a system like this, your processing cost is probably $50 to $80 a ton. So you generally charge for it to come in. Then you've got, then you've got your pricing, then what you sell it for. And if you're good at writing your contracts, you will always be in the red.
Would you be more for like a national mandate on recycling? Because I know for Europe, we do have a national, like really serious. Like I'm German, so we have really hardcore stuff. You can lose your house if you don't recycle correctly.
So
it's hardcore.
It's interesting. I was actually in Germany one time at a construction and demolition site. They stopped a truck leaving that site to go to a landfill because you can't get everything, right? The law there was that I think it was like 18% was the highest you could have of recyclables in the trash. Yeah. So I literally saw them segregating trash into bins, and then they took the recyclables and put it in another bin and weighed it all out while we were sitting there and made sure. So I'm not sure that would work here. Germany's a smaller country, obviously. Right now, capitalism's working pretty well here. I think the best thing that can happen here is that we just make sure that we can continue to make money at it, that there are end products. So that was the other thing I wanted to say to everybody. You want to help? Buy recycled materials. You're going to do your deck out back? There are some great looking HDPE planks that you can buy. I've got some friends who own a company. They make railroad ties out of the HDPE from Tide bottles and things like that. So make end products. I think that'll be here more effective than mandates. It's just here. I think it would just be so hard to police, and if we did it, it'd have to happen slowly. Because if you did it all of a sudden, people would just rebel. It's hard enough to get people like in the inner city or in large high rises where it's not as easy. It's just hard to even get them to do it, let alone try and mandate it. How are you going to police that? What do you do then? It's tough. But I'm glad, that Europe does, and it's worked well there.
Thank you.
You can recycle shredded paper. It's exactly like what happens with all the other paper. But it's what we call in the industry a royal pain in the ass. Because what happens is you use size sorting to get the glass out because you purposely break it and you make it into little pieces. Well, shredded paper is little pieces too. So a lot of the glass cleanup systems that we use have air and things like that to get out the shredded fiber from the glass. But people take that into consideration, and when HIPAA laws came into effect and people started shredding everything, we had, the industry had no choice but to make do and figure out how to get the shredded paper out of the glass. But yeah, you can recycle it. If you really want to be helpful, put it in a big bag and take it, somewhere else. But
let's take one more question.
This is a weather group here. What impacts do weather have on the recycling?
What happens if my recycling can blows over in a storm?
I think the biggest problem with weather is the cold. Because you will see that stuff will come into the facilities just in a big old ice cube chunk sometimes. You get rain. By the way, did you ever notice that now all the recycling bins have covers when they used to be like a box? You ever try and take a box that you got rain and then it froze and you try and throw that into something? Doesn't work too well. So they've stopped doing the blue boxes. Now it's all toters because of the weather. The rain and cold and even snow. And the last thing I will say about that is there are some screens that they use in this industry to separate the fibers from the containers, fiber being 2-dimensional, containers being 3-dimensional. These screens pull fiber up because the 2-dimensional will stick to them where the 3-dimensional rolls back. When it gets snowy and cold, these screens don't have as much friction, and so you get more fiber coming back with the containers. If you saw the initial video, they talked about now how they're using trommels to do the sizing in 2 and 3D, and that actually works a lot better, and that actually started in Europe with a German company called Stadler.
So I want to apologize because we called the talk everything you wanted to know about recycling, and clearly we aren't covering everything. This was by far the most abundant questions we've ever had, and we could go on for a long time, but we do have to respect the time of the meeting. So thanks, Scott Jable, once again, for an unbelievably great thing.
Appreciate it.